sort of run this whole meeting, and they started with a PowerPoint presentation, and I know Bob is here too.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. It's been a while since we've done an in-person meeting, so it's nice to see so many faces. Everybody here all right? All right. So, my name is Devin Eaton. I'm a senior of the bridge projects that are under construction right now. With me, I have Bob Skian, who is our director of the Office of Safety. So he has some insight on the intersection with Route 1 and Nequasset Rd. If there's any specific questions, he's here to help with that. So we have this presentation. I'm going to go through it. Probably won't take us long to go through the presentation. I'm happy to go back to any slides afterwards, so it's probably best if we hold most questions till the end. But we're happy to answer all the questions you have, or at least try to, and we can go back to any slide that somebody wants to see again at that point. So with that, I think, are we going to lower the lights a little bit? It's kind of hard to see. Is that still game plan? Yeah. Is that better? Everybody see it better now? Everybody see that red dot up there? Yeah. Bob's just going to clear it up for us a little bit.
Mess it up here.
That better? A little clearer? All right. So, again, here in the lovely town of Woolwich to talk about the bridge projects and the intersection project with Route 1 and Nequasset Rd. So, bridge projects located down here on the bottom part of the page. George Wright Road kind of swings off this way. And then way up top here is that Nequasset and Route 1 intersection, top of the page. So an agenda for the meeting, we're going to recap the bridge projects, talk about where they're at up to this point, kind of where they're going forward with construction. Then we can discuss the existing temporary traffic signal that's out there right now, talk about the project for making that a permanent traffic signal, and then talk about some updates to Nequasset Rd that we've been working with the town of Woolwich on. And then talk about some of the next steps for everything that's going on in and around this area that we've been working on. And then after that, we'll open it up for general discussion with everybody and try to answer any questions. So, first, the Station 46 bridge. So this replaces the bridge on the same alignment. This is the plan view from our construction documents of the bridge. You can see it's on the same alignment. Shift just a little bit. The bridge width is actually narrowing up for the structure a little bit. A lot of extra width on that existing structure out there. Well, the previous bridge, which is now gone. So here's what the new bridge looks like on the same span. So it shortens from the original 672 feet down to 619 feet, and it replaces 8 tower piers, which is really like 24, 25 individual pier sections to support the bridge structure itself, down to 3 concrete piers located at about 30 points of the structure itself. So advances in technology, concrete, handle a lot more weight than the steel sections could. The previous structure was fracture critical, which means if one part of it went bad, it could theoretically have collapsed. We kept a close eye on it, put a lot of maintenance dollars into it to make sure that never happened. But now, new structure, it's going to be a lot more sound, a lot less maintenance heavy than the previous structure. And then the reason it is so long is it spans the railroad. That's really the only thing to the naked eye that it looks like the bridge needs to span over. There's a little bit of water out there from time to time throughout the year. But for the most part, it's spanning the railroad, and then this is some of the deepest section of clay that I have seen in my 15 years working in engineering. It goes down over 200 feet of just straight clay. So huge settlements. You can see in the roadway over the years, we go out there and we shim pave in this area. In the low spot of the roadway as you get towards George Wright Road, you may have seen us out there paving pretty much every year sometimes. The road just settles, and it's really hard to account for that. That's why the bridge spans over it, because it's just snot, doesn't support anything. You can punch a bunch of holes and piles in it, and it helps. But the weight of the roadway itself will just cause that road to continuously settle. They projected almost 15 feet of settlement when they originally designed this bridge in the 30s, and I believe it. So that's why it's as long as it is, in case anybody was wondering. Here's that bridge in a longitudinal section. If you cut that bridge right in half on the length of the structure, that's what it's going to look like. So you can see the old tower piers in kind of light gray, a bunch of them through here, and we're replacing it with new concrete piers. You can still see it has that grade to it. It's I think it's 4.5% grade, something like that. Concrete abutments on each end. The railroad tracks are over here, perched up. This is just kind of that low-lying area. It occasionally has water in it. Supported on piles to account for that really deep clay formation through there. So some relatively recent photos. I'm sure you guys are a lot more up to date on what it looks like out there than I am, living here and driving through it every day. This is when they were removing the existing bridge. You can see the temporary bridge off to the side over here. The traffic is still on, kind of snaking its way down through the area. It's a bunch of cranes. Here's the railroad tracks in this photo. Those old abutments from the tower section that protect the tracks from, or the bridge from the tracks, I should say. And then this is just kind of from the opposite side, looking back by this crane from the other direction. It's looking up towards the Taste of Maine, which is over here, of all those crane mats they put out to try to stay in the dry a little bit more, and the remnants of the existing bridges they were tearing down. And then this is probably more close to what it looks like out there today. The bridge is gone. Here's the temporary bridge. Here's where the bridge used to be. This is them installing some sheet piles, so steel pile sections, to make a cofferdam to contain what they're doing for the construction of this substructure unit. So they're going to drive piles within this contained area. What it does is controlling water flow that comes through there, allows them to pump it dry if they want to, keeps it from caving in on itself when they're trying to work in there, those type of things. So that's what they're out there doing right now. This is a generator and air compressor. So they're a crane, they're driving these sheets into place to give themselves a safe working spot. So, why are we doing work as you approach George Wright Road? Right? This is a lot of the comments that we heard when we came to our first public meetings for Station 46 Bridge. We ended up adding a lot of work once we started. Station 46 is up here in the previous bridge. And we recognized that this was probably the most critical area, or the critical concern for this area of Route 1 is that on what was referred to as astronomical high tide, so high tide with a full moon, the road would flood. If you had a really windy day, the road might flood. That's why there's so much ponded water in that area, is that once the water rose up over the old Route 1 road bed, it had nowhere to go. It just got trapped between Route 1, the new Route 1, or the current Route 1, and the old Route 1 road bed, which is where all the water district pipes and whatnot are, and utilities span down there. So generally, water would get trapped. That's why there's all those little ponds out there. So this is what we wanted to address. We wanted to add this work in, this scope in. We had a federal grant, $25 million that we got to help address the resiliency of Route 1, which is an NHS highway, National Highway System in Maine. It's one of 3 or 4 roadways in the state that actually qualify as a national highway system. So we got all kinds of federal dollars to do work and improve this area. So we came to realize that it wasn't just replacing a fracture critical structure that was 90 years old. It was also making sure that folks that get to the area, that Route 1 was protected as the main access point to the mid-coast from southern Maine. So, to account for that, a couple of things. So, the existing culverts in the puddle area here, this ponded area, here's the dike bridge, the town-owned structure. Looks like a log flume most of the time, white water coming out both sides of it. And the George Wright Road here, this is Route 1. And as we analyzed things and did a hydraulic analysis, we found that, boy, we got to open that up. We wanted to restore tidal flow into the marsh. That was one of the original goals for a potential future project, and this kind of tied in to preparing for a future project to have full tidal restoration to the Back River Creek Marsh, located to the north of Route 1 through here. So in order to do that, we had to make an opening under Route 1. It was just some 8-foot and 6-foot culverts under there. A couple of them were just underwater all the time. There's a bigger one here that is still staying in place. They extended it. That temporary bridge kind of swings through this area right now to keep traffic during construction. So hydraulically, we want water to be able to get in here, so we open it up. So that's an 85-foot span structure now, or will be once construction goes. Same thing, there's a lot of clay in this area, a lot of settlement. To try to address that, we are doing what's called a vertical preload. So if you're curious why they were out there with a drill rig, Swiss cheesing the ground and putting in pipes, those are called whip drains. What that does is it allows some of the capillary water pressure to escape the ground, and it allows us to put additional load on top of the roadway and force a bunch of settlement out of the ground. So you probably have already started to see it coming in, but they're going to put upwards of 11 feet of fill material on the road out there, a bunch of extra weight to force the road to settle. We anticipate upwards of 14 inches under that weight. And that will, what that does is it allows our structure, the structure's not going to move, that's going to be on piles, it's going to stay where we put it, but the roadway approaches up to it are still subject to that clay settling on both sides of it. So this side, the ledge is a lot shallower than this side over here. Again, there's a pretty deep hole on this side. The low point of the roadway is just off this picture. So we want to address that. So we're preloading, try to get that settlement out so everything stays where we want it to, and we don't have to come out there and repave every 4 months, 5 months, 6 months when the road drops. So that is what's going on out there right now. This is what it's intended to look like, is have a span structure out there that makes an 85-foot opening for water to pass through. Unfortunately, it's still restricted by that existing culvert on George Wright Road. We'll get to that. So as the plans show right now, we're doing a 5-foot raising grade at the low point. The flooding pictures that I showed, the road's going up about 5 foot at that location, and it changes to about a foot or two in this area, and kind of ties in about halfway up the hill as you get towards that exposed bedrock top of the hill. So as we show it right now, we're reconnecting George Wright Road. We'll get to that about some of those changes as well. But no changes to this existing structure on George Wright Road. This is what that looks like in section. Similar to before, it's just a single span. This is a concrete bridge because we expect this to get wet more frequently, and it does have brackish or straight up salt water here. So we are using stainless steel in this whole structure to make sure that nothing corrodes faster than it should, so the structure can achieve that 100-year design life that we are aiming for any of our new structures in the state. So riprap, rock slopes on piles to keep everything in place. You see there'll be about 3 feet of clearance at the low side of the bridge at mean high water. So high tide, they have about 3 feet clearance. And then this dotted line here is that preload. That's that fill material that we bring in, and then that goes away in final condition, and you end up having about a 5-foot increase in the grade of the roadway over the existing. So this line down here is the existing road as it was. Here's where it's proposed to go in final condition. You can see it gets shallower as it goes up the hill to where it eventually ties in up towards the top of the hill. And here's some photos of them Swiss cheesing the ground with those wick drains. You can see them sticking out of the ground here. That crane, or the excavator or crane type equipment that they use to put those in. And then as they're starting to bring that fill material in and loading up that existing roadway footprint. So, benefit cost ratio. Here is that the previous view of the US Route 1 and the Nequasset Road intersection before we put the 30 signal in. We heard lots of comments. There's obviously a lot of accidents that happened out here. Something we've been looking into. Anytime we're requested to review an intersection, we do something called the benefit cost ratio. So we look at accidents, we look at traffic use, how much it costs to do the project, all of those type of things. And it comes out and shows that if you look at it in base condition, we're showing that the intersection isn't worth anything. It's actually a negative value because of the safety factors, because of the maintenance costs, all of those type of things. If we go through and put a new reconstructed and signalized intersection in a permanent condition, it jumps that benefit cost ratio up to 2.12, so it's over twice as valuable in terms of dollars and safety and things like that than the existing unsignalized intersection would.
The intersection is what? What did you just say?
So, in the existing condition, or in the previous condition before the signals went in, we realized and understand that it wasn't, there was a lot of accidents. It cost money to both deal with those accidents, to keep the condition of the intersection clear, up to the standards that it was previously, those type of things. When you look at, a lot of it comes from level of traffic and the accident crash rates that you find coming through the area. Bob, jump in if I'm misspeaking at all.
Okay.
So if you look at how much money you would spend to upgrade the intersection, which is about $1 million, this is probably a little low. This is a couple years old at this point. And the world just decided to be more expensive. So, you know, if you look at that from how much you would spend to upgrade that intersection, all of a sudden the value of that intersection increases because of the equipment you have out there, the improved safety, the reduced accidents, and you have an overall benefit or cost ratio. You need to divide that number by the other of 2. So it's a significantly improved intersection with a signal out there. It's basically how we're trying to show these numbers.
So are you actually changing the roadways or just?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
Good question. So, here is what it looks like out there approximately right now in that temporary condition. This is a little bit harder to see. I have a photo that's a little bit zoomed in, but you can see we have kind of those striped islands out there to shift traffic over, to have a protected left turn lane in each direction, and then one lane of through traffic and right-hand turn traffic on each direction of Route 1. And then the signage that shows how to do that. So left-hand turn, straight, and a right-hand turn in the other lane. This is that zoomed in a little bit just to kind of show that those turn pockets on each side and stop bars on Nequasset Rd. And here's the fire station parking lot there. And then here is Google Earth actually has this up to date if you go in and look at it. So here's what it looks like in Google Earth right now. You can see the temporary signals in, the left-hand turn pocket, the old center line that was burned off to shift things around a little bit. So we acknowledge in the temporary condition this isn't ideal, but for the temporary condition of construction for the shortened period of time of 2 to 3 years, 2 to 4 years, I guess, depending on if there's any delays in construction, that this is suitable. It still improves the area a lot, helps traffic go through while still allowing cars to exit Nequasset in a safer and more frequent usage.
That's pretty dangerous.
So, proposed what we would like to do for a permanent intersection out there. We talked with the town a lot, and what we would like to do is actually add a protected right-hand turn lane. So the reason in a temporary condition why it was the way it was is existing footprint of the pavement out there. We were only able to utilize what we had. This is going to require some right-of-way acquisition on this property. That's why we didn't do it. That's a long process, a lot of coordination, things like that. Temporary condition, it still showed a huge improvement to put a temporary signal out there while we closed that southern end of George Wright Road. But in a permanent condition, we acknowledge that we've gotten a lot of comments and complaints about near misses, things like that, folks that are trying to turn right and people not paying attention behind them as they slow down to turn and somebody's trying to go straight. So you still have those perspectives. What's that?
Will it be the same on both sides?
I believe it's just heading eastbound.
What about the schools?
So again, nothing is finalized. This is just kind of a basic footprint. We realize that this is the more problematic area based on the comments that we've heard and from general analysis that was done. This was done a couple of years ago at this point. but was used to help generate what was done for the temporary condition. But there's some lengths here that are hard to read, but it does lengthen that impact. It changes the width of some of the median. Basically, that footprint increases. We gain some extra width out there. The signals become permanent. So we understand some of the issues that temporary signal was having when it first went into use. We appreciate your patience. We understand there was issues with it. I talked to Jason, I think, twice a day for the first couple of weeks that I've been being in place. Excuse me. So we understand that there were some issues. One of the cameras got knocked out of alignment, so it wasn't registering traffic on Nequasset Road, so that was fixed, and it seemed to work a lot better after that. And so that actually gave Nequasset Road a phase, which seemed to be the issue when it first went into usage. So permanent signal would certainly have more of a permanent signal setup. The differences in some of the preemption and things like that would be less impactful on a permanent signal. They wouldn't be as easily knocked out of alignment, things like that. So
those yellow lines, is that all of the property that you need to get?
these up here, no. So these are just dimensions that show distance from the edge of the intersection back. So it's kind of hard to read, but I was working out the images I already had. So. And again, it's not finalized. There's still engineering that would need to be done, design stuff on this. So this is closer to what it would look like in a permanent condition. There's still an opportunity to talk about other things, specifically on the other approach. So I'm not going to stand here and say this is final, end of story, but we'll have to look into things a little bit more at this point.
The right-of-way that they took through is wide enough for a 4-lane highway.
So, Route 1 does have quite a right-of-way footprint out there, but it does neck down on the sides of it. So a lot of it is the side roads that have some of the issues, specifically as you get off of the edge of the pavement for Route 1 on this corner here to widen out there. And clear zone is really the issue. We have to make sure that the clear zone is 16 feet off of the edge of whichever travel way it is. So at full speed, so it's different on that right turn pocket. So all of those things have to be analyzed. I don't know exactly what the right-of-way looks like out there. It's something we still have to assess, but I'm pretty sure that we did have some impacts on this corner. So
The road that you're proposing to widen the road, can you use the material that you've got down as a preload on down by the dike so you can fill in with that to save money?
So it depends on how this all comes to fruition here. So that preload is going to be in place for a year, and that preload is all owned by Reed. So if this project gets added to the bridge contract, if everything works out, there may be an opportunity for that. If not, it may be an entirely separate contractor doing it. So it's a good question. That would be some coordination we could do. We're certainly not looking to spend money just to spend it. We try to be as efficient as possible on anything that we're doing. So next up would be some upgrades to Nequasset Road. This is something that your selectmen were very in favor of, something that they really talked to us a lot about, gave us some really good ideas and thoughts on. We met with them several times about some of this. And this is kind of where the draft layout of those upgrades would come from. So in the past, if you folks would remember, there was a couple of different options for what could be done if that southern end of George Wright Road were to be closed permanently. In order to do that and to warrant a signal, the traffic would want to be forced up to Nequasset Road to that connection. That's the safest intersection with the best sight distance in existing conditions. So that's how we kind of led to this. So in working with the town, we came to, well, if we can close that southern end and then make some upgrades to Nequasset Road, it kind of works in everybody's favor. So
What are we looking at?
I'll explain. So in this case, here's your existing alignment of Nequasset Road. Here's the telephone pole on the corner of George Wright Road and Nequasset Road. The cemetery is right here.
Okay.
The town office is up here. It's the town office parking lot. This is the town office septic system. Here's that water main shed on George Wright Road. So, what's the main issue with this intersection, right? It's hard to see in certain directions. We've gone through and changed things around a little bit, which I understand was a little wonky for you guys when it first came up. But to make things work and traffic flow a little better, we did change the stop orientation of that intersection so that Nequasset has the right of way and the stop is on George Wright Road. So that would revert back to the other way with an intersection like this. We would tee it up so that it squares into George Wright Road in a T-type intersection. It allows that sight distance, allows you to look both directions, allows trucks to make that swing. So generally, this was preferred kind of from everybody's safety standpoint. So this is where we came up with some of these other lines. These arrows here are ditch line. This is a very kind of rough cut of what could be done to the roadway to make things fit and get drainage through here. So it shows these lines are cut lines. You'd have to start back here and kind of cut down to a ditch and back up to the roadway on both sides. And this is certainly the most aggressive impact. It could probably be massaged to make sure that water drains and there's not a huge amount of excavation needed if it's not necessary. So. First crack through, this is what is likely going to be done in some way, shape, or form, is teeing up that intersection. And then those utility poles likely have to be updated, raised up just to get the lines further over the intersection. So any dump trucks, the fire trucks, things like that don't have to worry about clearance on that intersection because you do start to get into that span of the wires between the poles. So here you're not worrying about wires crossing the intersection. Here you'd have to, so something would have to be done to that pole to update that. So who's responsible for what when it comes to this? What we're talking about doing is DOT would do this roadway realignment, or at least participate in the vast majority of it. That would tee that intersection into George Wright Road. What the town has agreed to do is to relocate the septic system and to clear some of the trees out of the way so that the roadway can be shifted over there. And then we would have to work together for getting the utilities adjusted and some of the other fine-tuning. So there is a water main that runs under Nequasset Road as well, so we'd have to coordinate with Bath Water District for that.
When does that propose to happen?
I'll get to it. Good question. So this is what that would look like in profile if you cut down the center of that proposed roadway. No matter what you do, it's still a steep road on Nequasset Road. This is within state, within town wave standards of the 11.5%. Essentially what the other road is too. And the other road is like 10 point something, so it's a little steeper, but it would be straight on. You'd have much better sight distance. It'd be a wider road.
Can tractor trailers make that corner with that?
Yes. Yeah, that. So we've done all the turn radius through this intersection, and this is idealized. It's probably at the mouth would be, would have that radius of pavement on each end similar to this, but squared up so that a truck can make that turn and get up the hill.
Devin, when we talked about this at some point in the last couple of years, you talked about doing that swing radius, and I said, yeah, but the grade's too steep, and you don't have a computer way to see if that can happen, because 11 is too low, it's 15 at the...
We can't hear the question and comment.
I'll repeat it after you.
So there's at the bottom, that's a 15% grade, when you first make that curve. So have you figured out how to analyze that to see if a truck can actually make that? Because you just drive down there right now and you're going to see all the gouges in the pavement from trucks and trailers trying to make that swing and not able to because of the grade.
Sure. So the question was, the existing roadway, trucks will bottom out and go through that intersection. If you have a flatbed trailer, things like that, there's gouges in the roadway, things of that nature. We acknowledge that that's a concern. The way that the town road was constructed, again, we didn't really have any participation in that, and I'm certainly not passing the buck. I acknowledge it's an issue. It's still early on. We'll have to run simulations to make sure that all of those things can be adjusted. We're certainly not trying to make the situation any worse. But this is the first crack to it. There's still a lot of engineering that would need to be done for this. We'd still have to analyze it more, I guess, to answer your question. But we certainly don't want that existing condition to be maintained, since it's not an ideal situation, if we can avoid it. So short answer, we'll have to look into it more. We're not trying to get trucks stuck on the hill.
Wouldn't you just simply blast the ledge on the way?
So it's still that you're trying to put, it's a quick change in grade from where the town office is perched down to where George Wright Road is. So you're still trying to fit it with legal curves for both headlight, stopping sight, and comfort criteria of those curvatures. So you can see there's all this documentation, there are these numbers here. So these are vertical curves. So you're trying to fit all of these vertical curves together to meet a design standard, so that it doesn't feel like you're getting jerked around as you're driving the car, or you have, pinch points at the top where you're making a point that's difficult to traverse with a vehicle, especially something that rides a little bit lower. So all of that is trying to be balanced out. This is the first crack. This is what it could look like. It's just to kind of give you a reference that it still ends up being a pretty steep roadway, similar to the existing condition, but better sight distances, a little bit more control, better drainage, pulls you away from that cemetery, and just overall gives a better horizontal curvature turn on and off the road, where you can see a lot better in both directions. Does that answer your question?
You have work to do.
Yes. Yes, we acknowledge there is still work to be done for it. So, next steps. I just thought this was a really cool image. They had some drone footage when they opened up the temporary bridge, and some of the first cars going across it. You can see it kind of snake through and connect everything right before they started demoing the previous structure there. So for the bridges, the next steps, construction is obviously ongoing. It's scheduled to run to the end of 2024 at this point, according to Reed & Reed's schedule. So they will still be out there for a while. And the southern end of George Wright Road is going to remain closed for pretty much the whole time. So those signals will be there through end of 2024 at the very least. But I'll get to that. So, next steps for the intersection project. The main goal that both Maine DOT and the town of Woolwich want is a smooth transition from a temporary signal to a permanent signal out there. We understand we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on the signal. That's what we were hoping, that's what we were expecting, is that it would really improve things out there for folks traveling through the area. We want to make sure that this doesn't go away and you're put back to a situation that nobody liked and that was significantly less safe. So we want to make that transition as smooth as possible from temporary to permanent. If things line up, that means it would likely be built in 2024 or 2025, and those temporary signals would stay in place until then, something like that. That would still have to be worked out. And then Nequasset Rd. Right-of-way coordination, again, this is all town-owned property, town-owned stuff. So it's just going through the appropriate coordination for allowing DOT crews to work on not DOT property. And then if the town has to acquire anything, because again, in final condition, this would still be a town road, be maintained by the town after the fact. We're just helping facilitate the realignment of it. So I kind of already got into this based on the question, but final design engineering still needs to be done for this. It needs to be smoothed out. All that stuff needs to be worked out. From a planned view, if you're looking at this from the bird's eye view straight down, the horizontal turns are a lot better. If you're looking at it from the vertical curve perspective, as was pointed out, we still want to make sure that things aren't in a worse condition than they were, or are. And then, again, the town would have to move the septic system and take down some of the trees and things like that. And then we would both have to coordinate utility stuff to at least raise those lines to get them out of the way of the intersection. So, that's the presentation. Here's my contact information. And I can get the town a copy of this so you folks can have it and click through it if you want. And again, myself and Bob are here to answer any questions you guys might have. So that's where we're at. That's the presentation. Thank you for coming, and I guess let the questions begin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How do you eat this ice cream cone?
Just easier to hear people recording. My first question, and probably a lot of other people.
Hold the mic right now.
Ice cream.
No, closer.
A lot of other people probably have the same question.
Closer.
Closer?
There you go.
There you go. Is there any way to increase the length of time on the Nequasset Road for people to get out onto Route 1? It's very fast, and only maybe 3 cars can go through at one time.
3 seconds ain't long.
It's not long enough.
Okay, I mean, that's certainly good comments. What I can say is we can look at it. Obviously, the priority is Route 1, especially at certain times of the day when BIW is getting out, things like that. You know, if we had it so that Nequasset Road was a 2-minute cycle, we'd get the same comments in reverse. You can't stop Route 1 traffic, it's backed all the way up to Kingdom Come. So it's certainly a balancing act, but we can certainly look at that. Timings can be adjusted if we feel like there's not enough time for cars to get out of there. You know, obviously some cars are running red lights, we understand that, we can't control all of that. But it's something that can be reviewed, for sure.
And after that first light, you get 3 cars out. Then you gotta wait 3-4 minutes before it changes again. That's a little longer than most people wanna sit and wait. Especially when there's not a hell of a lot going on the road.
And certain times of day, that's going to be more frustrating than others, right? So it's based on, most of the time, peak hour timings. And again, temporary signal, it's not perfect, it's not a permanent condition. That's something that can be addressed more for a permanent signal where it adjusts throughout the day. These signals aren't necessarily set up for that. It's intended to improve the condition from where it was in the existing spot and then give us some good information and give us the ability to get some good feedback in advance of a permanent signal. So we understand it's not perfect. We can keep playing with things over the next couple of years to try to make it better. But it is still temporary, and that has to be acknowledged as well. So, thanks.
So, to go on what Sandy was saying, and I think I had emailed Allison about it actually, my concern with the light and trying to get on Route 1 from the Nequasset, like, water side is that winter is coming. And my real concern is, I know actually, Shaw, you do a great job. I live on Stony Hill and you guys stand very well, but my real concern is I take my stepson to school every morning. And I really need to, I wait to make sure everyone stops. And so when people mention the time of the light, even if it's just for winter, I like pause. And if I'm first, like I make sure people stop and then I want to go out. Or there are people going forward. And truly, I'm talking like maybe 10 to 15 seconds for that light in the morning so that when it's snowing out or snowy, that we can wait for people to stop and not slide, and also make sure that we can get out safely. I'm fine with waiting a light or two when there are a bunch of people. But truthfully, like, I'm concerned about winter and like dying, you know? And I really appreciate that you're here speaking to us about it, but like, if anyone could just add a couple of seconds so that when it's snowy out, like, I don't try and like leave from all the way at the other end, because I live on Murphy's Corner Road and I can go out by, like, you know, to get on Route 1 that way, but I don't want to have to. So if you guys could consider that, or if there's any way that would be helpful for people who might have a concern like that, to share the information with you. it would be really helpful, because again, it's fine now, like, it sucks to wait. It does, I'm really sorry. People don't like to wait, change is hard, I don't like it, but winter is coming. So anyway, not to beat a dead horse, but like, consider the time for me, okay? Just please. Well, for all of us, for my aging parents, for Bob and Sandy, my neighbors.
It's a great comment, and I don't know, Bob, if you want to chime in on anything, but, you know, we can look at timings. We understand that different times of year are going to impact things differently.
Yeah.
We want to get that feedback from
I'm
all
afraid.
seasons, and it's going to give us several years of seasons to have better timing, better, you know, response time for emergency service things. It's going to allow us to have all of, we're going to have documentation of all of that stuff from this temporary signal. We understand it's not perfect. We tried to make that as clear as we could when it was installed, with the public meetings leading up to this. But all of those things can be reviewed. It can be adjusted. We can have the text come out and look at that stuff. But do you want to add anything to that, Bob? Or?
Yeah, I mean, signal design is, it's kind of a specialty, so for a temporary signal, it's probably, I'm sure it's not optimized, so there is a lot that can be done. I mean, what we would normally do is we would get up-to-date turning movements throughout the day, so we know, how many people are turning. We actually simulate it, and so we can see the vehicles moving around, and we can change the signal timings and see how long the queue lengths are, and whether the vehicles, how many vehicles can make it through in one cycle. You know, but there are other things like you mentioned where, you know, the snow isn't in the simulation, but that's an important thing for us to know. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
No, please, I'm actually really concerned. I mean, I drive there 6 to 8 times a day, going to and from Morris to pick up, to drop off, to go to work, to go to my meetings, like to go. So it actually, especially in the morning, and again, I know it's a really high traffic time, and Bob, I really appreciate it, because it actually is very concerning to me, because a lot of people who are here are my neighbors and people that I've grown up with for the past 50 years. So if you guys could just like think about the weather just for that period of time, we'd all really appreciate it.
And that's all part of the design of the permanent one.
Yeah.
But even in the meantime, I mean, just simply adding 2 seconds of red time for everybody means it's going to delay everybody 2 more seconds, but that might give you that extra time.
Yeah.
That would make you feel more comfortable that everybody's stopping. So if everyone who's not willing to give her 2 seconds.
You don't want me to die.
No, I mean,
6 times though, so we're actually taking a half a minute.
yeah, we certainly understand that, you know, just because it's an improvement over the previous doesn't mean that nothing else can be done to it.
No,
So,
I appreciate it. Just putting that bug in your ear, because
Yeah.
again, winter's upon us.
Yeah, that's, you know, this is the feedback that we need to hear. You know, we have field staff out here that try to monitor it and make sure that it's working, and they check in on it every so often. Or, you know, I get a phone call, I have them go out and look and sit at it from every leg and make sure everything's working. So, you know, those are all things that we can examine and look at. And honestly, tomorrow will be a good test if everything. But yeah, we can look into those things. Thank
No,
you.
thank you.
Larry, you had.
First off, thank you for being here, this is great. I got a report sent to me by somebody.
Louder, please.
I got a report sent to me by somebody showing the water elevation rising on the north side or northwest side of Route 1 there. Can you discuss that in particular? Because I live on that side.
Sure.
Thank you.
We do some clicking here. And it may be a little bit more difficult to see. So you're talking this area here, in the marsh area?
There and above the railroad tracks.
And, okay, clear other side, yeah. So, when we put this bridge structure in, it's essentially maintaining the same condition as there is currently, because there's still a massive tidal restriction here under George Wright Road. More water will be allowed into the marsh, and that still is going to have some ebb and flow from the tidal reaction in this area. But there's not going to be a significant raising grade that's going to cause anything to flood on the far side of the marsh. Before this whole, so In the long term, the ultimate goal is to remove this section of George Wright Road, right? Maintain the signal at Nequasset Road, remove this section of George Wright Road, dead end it here. There's talk about where we put the boat launch. Is it off on this side? Is it off of Route 1? Those are all discussions that we still have to have. The DOT is still very much in favor of still having a boat launch here. We do have the right of access control of it, so we can work with the town to get another one out here, but it takes a little bit of coordination. The reason this wasn't included in the bridge work is because by opening this up, you do change the marsh a lot. That analysis was still ongoing at the time of the bridge work. Ruth maybe can speak to this a little bit more than I can, but I believe it has been more completed at this point, so we do have a model of how the marsh is impacted by the tidal flows. That's the whole point, is we want to restore tidal flow there, but we want to make sure we're not doing anything that's too adverse to the properties around it either.
So what will it go up when you take out the George Wright Road?
That is something that I am not 100% sure of. It will go up, obviously, because you want water to go into the marsh, but I don't believe there's
It
any...
ain't gonna go out any lower unless you blast the ridge. There's a ridge underneath the culvert, the box culvert, that comes up, and that box culvert sits on it. It's 3 feet higher than low tide. 3 feet higher than low tide. So even if you take that out, you're not gonna drain all that water from up on the north side.
There is desire from all of the federal permitting agencies to have tidal restoration restored to the marsh. Excuse me. So the original Route 1 basically cut off that tidal flow to the marsh. So it's been cut off for decades, 100 years, whatever. So we understand, and they understand, that it may not just be as simple as taking the bridge out, that there may be more grading and slope work and earthwork that needs to be done to open that up fully to tidal flow through there.
If you open that up, that road, George Wright Road, take it out, you still got a ridge that runs across. Unless you blast that changes the whole dynamics of what was on the north side of the road.
That's what I'm saying. So like, it's not just as simple as removing the structure. There's more work that needs to be done to allow that tidal flow. And that's what still needs to be analyzed. That's why it wasn't included in these bridge projects, because there's a lot more to it than just removing that structure, because every property that surrounds that marsh is potentially impacted by it. It's not to say that any property is going to drastically flood, but water levels do go up at least twice a day when the tide comes in. So that is the ultimate goal, is to make that into a tidal marsh again. It's only like a brackish marsh at this point. And the tidal influence is pretty small. It's just kind of maybe 100 feet or so from the road, but there are other challenges to that which still need to be worked out, and that's a future project that CALT, the Kennebec Estuary Land Trust, which Ruth is the representative for, they're working to find funding for that. The DOT is likely going to help partner with that to help with some of that work. If it all comes together, it might be able to be done as part of the end of the bridge project, but there's still a lot of balls up in the air at this point with that. So it's excuse me. There's when you're using federal money, there's a lot that comes into play for it from a permitting perspective, all of those things. So just a lot going on.
They're giving it away these days. Just vote for the Democrats. They'll give you all kinds of money.
It wasn't on the agenda, but my concern is the routing or rerouting of the water of that up in Nequasset down 127. Is that done deal, or is that?
So Bath Water District has coordinated with, or has filed applications with the region office of the DOT to do that. I don't know where that stands. That's not in my
Will
court.
we be having another meeting like this to discuss that?
I believe they would have to, yes.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make any sense to route that 3 miles down the road and not have a temporary if they have to get across that marsh.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly do not have the knowledge to answer that question. I apologize for that. I'm sure that if you reached out to the water district, they'd be able to provide more information. They have to at least get permits to be under the state route through the region. I don't know where that stands. Honestly, I can't speak to that with any sort of...
Right. So real quickly, I'll tell you what we know. So,
Oh, yeah.
okay, I'll go very close. The Bath Water District proposed connecting to the line out here on Nequasset Road, running over to 127 down behind Cumberland Farms. They were scheduled to do that project this summer and go to bid, but then there's been material shortages and cost increases. And my dad knows, it went out to bid, right? And
Why?
why what?
Why are they doing it?
Well, because they want redundancy. Right now, the main runs down Nequasset Road, down George Wright Road. It's a 16-inch main. It runs across the Dyke Bridge as we know it right there. And so I think they're planning ahead for the removal of it or the possible relocation of it. So to keep water service active, they would need another route. It's a lot of other things. You know, what's that?
Government wanted to maintain too.
Right, exactly. So it gives them two, this main is getting older and older, and it gives them another new route. It's good for the town.
The main was only put in the 70s.
It was, Philip, but it sits on top of the Dyke Bridge, so it's only in the ground 2 feet or so. Real quickly, can I just touch on one other thing? So, 2 or 3 things that are important tonight. How many folks here like a light?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we want to give DOT the feedback that we like the traffic light, we know it's a temporary, I call it construction light, and we all sort of understand now the differences between that light and a permanent light, which hopefully may be coming. The Select Board and the Road Commissioner's more urgent concern is that Nequasset George Wright intersection. Right now the angle is wrong, the grade isn't constant. I've been out there and done some work, and it's very steep and then it flattens off, and we feel that the proposed relocation that we've been ironing out with DOT is a major benefit to the town. The town owns all the property, and we would really like to see that happen sooner than later. We feel that this winter is going to be very difficult for traffic to make that corner. It's steep, the fire trucks can drag, trailers drag. We've done some demonstrations. I was hoping that we'd leave here tonight by really giving Bob and you folks and you've indicated you have funding for this.
Lock the doors,
Right.
let it on.
Yeah. But anyway, that's sort of an important thing for the town. I don't know if that can go on for 3 years or whatnot. We would actually like to see something happen maybe even next year if possible. What we would do as a select board is come to you folks with the replacement septic system, which is put in 80 or 81, right, David? And the tree work and whatever is what we would put into that and work with these guys. But just remember that water main is down that hill, so we looked at the grade lowering of the hill as it is now. Can't do that, you can't take ledge out, we've got a 16-inch main there. We don't want to deal with any of that. So the relocation would be there's a couple other factors there. Anyway, to answer everybody's question.
No, that was great. Thank you, Jason.
I applaud you for the work you've done, and I agree with Jason that this is urgent to get it done. But the more urgent concern that I have is that coming north on Route 1, as the light starts to change, people have already sped up after the construction site, and my concern is as we get snow on the right-hand side of the road and we're trying to slow down, you have to almost speed up and then just brake as you make the turn. Somebody's going to either get rear-ended, which is a problem, or, as people tend to do, to go around, they might end up hitting head-on and somebody coming southbound. So, to me, the most urgent problem, the safety problem, is that slowing down on the right-hand side, even if it could be done a temporary grading like a breakdown lane, just to let you slow down before you have to make that 90-degree turn, or somebody hits you from behind. Because I'm always trying to look in both the rearview mirror and the driving at the same time. So.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that comment. I mean, we certainly understand that having that protected right-hand lane there is something that we would want in a permanent condition, and that's something that we're looking to do. I understand it's a concern now. It's something that can be looked into. I can't promise that that can be done. That's something that we can take feedback on, and kind of present to the powers that be. But what I would say is, if you talk to Jason and have them submit something to us, it's a little easier from that direction. You'll be next after this one, okay?
Thank you. He actually stole my question, but thanks for answering. A follow-up question. We're happy that the signal is in place. But we do wonder about the possibility of establishing a no engine braking zone through there. It's increased quite a lot since the signal's been in place.
Okay, I honestly don't have a whole lot of experience on that, about what goes into being able to put those signs up. The risk that you run into, sorry, I keep hitting the microphone with my brain and making that banging sound. My understanding is that it opens you up a little bit more from a lawsuit perspective if you say no engine brakes, because it tells them that you can't slow down. So I don't know all of the details of that. We can certainly look into what can potentially be done to try to minimize that noise. We understand it's louder out there. You know, we certainly didn't pick concrete panels that are 10 feet wide on the temporary bridge. That makes a thump, 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 thump every 2 seconds. So we understand it's noisier. It's construction. I know it can be obnoxious, but it is a short period of time, even though it seems long. You know, we have to be able to get through and do this construction out there. And things like that, unfortunately, do come out of it that, you know, it's louder for the trucks as they're being forced to slow down. But previously, they weren't touching the brakes at all as they were coming up to that intersection when there was no signalization there. So it is a change. Folks will get used to it as the trucks go through that area more on a permanent basis with the signal there. But we can, again, certainly look into what options are for there. I don't have enough knowledge to speak about that personally, but it can be looked at.
Yeah, there was an aspect of the other gentleman's question that I don't think you got to. That was the speed limits. That people are really cranking up the speed as they're heading north. And I think the current speed limits are very bizarre. It goes like 35 to 45 to 55 to 45, all in the space of about a mile. And is there any real reason to have it go that fast? Because especially as we get the winter conditions, people going 55 are not going to slow down immediately when it hits the 45, and they're not going to make us comfortable as we're making that turn.
Yeah, I want to talk to the region traffic engineer. They're the ones that set speed limits on the roads. Sure. Did everyone hear what I had just said, or should I repeat that? I will talk to the regional traffic engineer, who is the person for the area that sets the speed limits. I think there would likely be a permanent transition zone as you approach the signal when it becomes permanent. So the question that was raised is, should there be that 50-mile-an-hour piece in there? And I think that's something that, as a department, we will want to discuss.
Actually, I have a question from someone who was not able to be here, and they live down on, and I think I've talked to you about this before, Everett Dow neighborhood where they actually could, that was the name. And I'm just going to read it. It says, their primary concern is the low frequency vibrations when the large trucks pass over the ramp, the temporary bridge, right, the concrete planks. Second is the quote-unquote normal frequency, loud noise from the vibrations of the trucks crossing the bridge. Both, they said, add up to feeling like we are in a thunderstorm a great deal of the time. The low frequency vibrations are the physically uncomfortable ones due to the pressure differentials. The other ones are just irritating.
Thank you for answering or asking that question. So I was going to ask the same thing. I live right there, right at 46. And I'll tell you, like the other night when you guys were working, that thumping to about almost midnight drove me nuts. And I had to go out several times to calm down. We have a duck and goose hatchery. And I had to calm them down. So it's one of these things of that thumping, the engines coming down off that hill part there. You guys came in a year ago and cleared all of that debris brush that was there, and it got louder. So that was the perfect question, because I was getting ready to ask that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, it's I certainly am not a sound expert. You know, certainly every construction site is loud at certain parts of the day, and we understand that some of it can be obnoxious. Something that we're looking into is a sound study. for that to see, what's going on out there. One of the comments we got is from pretty far away, so it would stand to reason that it wouldn't be an issue, but again, sound bounces around in some weird ways sometimes, especially along the bay and things like that. So that's something that we are actively looking into, is some sort of sound study for the area to see what's going on. So.
Is the new bridge going to be designed like the new bridge going over the river, where it's very few breaks? And
there's it's going to be a jointless structure. So.
It's going to be one of those hollow in the center?
No, so it's steel beams with a concrete deck and a paved wearing surface. But the reason we pave it is so that, as it wears out, it can be resurfaced a lot faster. Just grind out and put it back. And there's not going to be any joints at the substructure units. So that's the old one had a joint in every substructure unit. That was part of the problem. Salt water gets down onto the steel, down to the bearings, and in that case, down on the substructure, and it would start to wear it out really fast as the salt water eats away at the protective coating, the paint, and then the steel itself. So the permanent structure, both structures, are not going to have any joints, so it'll just be onto the bridge, off the bridge, that's it.
So the overpass over Bath, when they put that together, every joint in it they had to shim it.
Yep.
And it's back making a noise every time you go over the damn thing.
And that is probably due for a resurfacing, would be my guess. I certainly am not the one that puts the project list together. But that's a segmental structure that has a lot of joints, that has a lot of pieces that connect together. So it's bound to be a little bit louder in those instances, but you sacrifice the span for having to upkeep on that a little bit more to clear span the river more. So we had a question over there first.
Hi. Okay. My question is, has consideration been given to pedestrians at all? Doesn't appear to have currently during the project, but when it's done, will there be any option for walking?
Sure. Yes, I will start with the temporary structure. So the temporary structure is actually quite a bit wider than most temporary structures because we acknowledge it's really long, it's going to be there for a while. I think it has a 30-foot curb-to-curb or 32-foot curb-to-curb width. Typically, it's basically closer to 24 to 26. So there is some extra width out there for pedestrians. We understand, obviously, it's not an ideal pedestrian situation during construction. Final condition. The bridge is going to have 12-foot lanes and 8-foot shoulders, so it's 40 feet curb to curb. It's a little bit narrower overall than existing, but it's striped such that it's going to feel a lot wider because it's not going to have that center turn lane for the whole stretch of the bridge that ate up most of that extra space. So it will have really wide shoulders. I think there's 6 foot at the narrowest point, which is on that Taste the Main corner as the curve of the bridge comes in, just to maintain a consistent bridge width. Because it's a huge cost savings to do that. But it's still very wide shoulders. That'll be really good for bicycle traffic, any pedestrians. Is this still working? Yeah. For bicycle traffic is what we heard from the most. Obviously, Route 1's not a great walking corridor, but it will have that 6 to 8 foot width on the shoulder. I mean, it's 8 foot for like 90% of the bridge on both sides. So.
And just a follow-up to that, will it be possible to go down George Wright and get onto Route 1 from there? Will there be a connection at all?
Like after George Wright Road is removed? Like, well, like that connection, like we're talking about to maintain that signal, is that what you're talking about?
Like the old one. I think she's talking about the old one. Yeah.
Right.
To add to that, are they going to put a walkway structure in there for people who are walking or riding bikes that can connect to George Wright instead of putting a roadway in? That'd be a better way of asking that question.
So I don't believe there would be a plan for anything like that, but again, that project is in its infancy still as far as removing that connection entirely. For the permanent signal, we would close off that end of George Wright Road to traffic, but it would still be there. So it could still have a pedestrian and bicycle access. It'd just be Jersey barriers or it'd be probably guardrailed across at Route 1, or there'd be a gate because we'll still maintain access from Route 1 to get down to Station 46 to work underneath of it.
Is there a way that you can ask that question to the superiors that are doing all this to make sure that there is access for people to be able to walk through, be able to take kayaks down, or anything else like that?
It's certainly something that could be reviewed. We can work with Kelt on that, or Kelt will be headlining that project, so it's probably a good question to direct to them. DOT is just kind of participating, not necessarily leading that project. But again, it's still pretty early on, so I can't speak to what exactly will be part of it. But it's a good comment.
Yeah, I just, there's a lot of questions on noise. Pedestrian access to George Wright on where you're contemplating taking out, seems like it might be a little sketchy, a little dangerous. But can you discuss, what's the traffic forecast? Is it getting worse, more traffic, or is noise going to increase, or is it getting less going forward, I mean, relatively speaking, in a few years?
Typically, traffic is only projected to increase. Anytime we do a traffic count, we project it over a 20-year period with like a 2% growth rate per year. 2% per year is what we use, I believe, for just as kind of a baseline. So if we go out there and we typically take counts every 3 years, 5 years?
Every 2 years. The other complexity here is the seasonal traffic. So there'll be times in the winter where it's not quite so busy. I mean, you still have a major employer that lets out a ton of people all at one time. But you also have, summer traffic is obviously much, much higher.
Year after year, is it forecasted to go up or stay the same?
Up.
I would assume some growth. I'm not sure exactly what it would be at this point off the top of my head.
So the pandemic generally had a decrease in traffic across the state. We are seeing that is coming back up to pre-pandemic levels. We're pretty much back at that point. So, we assume it's going to be like it was in the past, where it just continues to tick up a little bit. More and more population in the world is just ever increasing, and more people drive. So, and people are driving for longer, than they may have used to in the past. So, all of that kind of comes into play. But typically, we always assume a growth every year when we do a traffic count and project it out over, the first 20 years of a structure life before we would do any sort of, maintenance on the structure of any measurable amount, is what we typically look at from paving perspective. We typically look at a paving structure for a 20-year cycle, and that's why we project 2% over 20 years to get our kind of current and future traffic levels in any area.
So you said we have 2 to 3 years left of this project. The intersection at Route 1 and Nequasset Road has seen, last I looked, a 400% increase in crashes. So I'm worried about winter time. Told my family not to take Route 1 because DOT staff have told me they're concerned about the S-curves on Route 1 at the construction zone. So I'll probably be taking Middle Road as a safer option wintertime. But my concern is the summertime, when we see the increased traffic with tourists. We can blame it on unfamiliarity with the roadway all we want, but I don't want to be looking in my rearview mirror at cars barreling down on me. If you go on the DOT's crash query tool, you type in high crash locations or high crash intersections, and this is now on there and it never has been. So I want to express my concerns about that and the hopes that there are significant changes made to that before next May kicks around, so that by taking away the George Wright Road, southern end of George Wright Road off-ramp off of Route 1, that was our safe, dedicated right-hand turn lane. And that was the way probably the majority of us that live on that side of Route 1 took, because it was safe. We don't have that anymore. So I know those changes are going to be done on the permanent lights, we can't wait that long. It's not safe to do so. For switch apps from the residents and fire department side, my staff can't get to the station when traffic backs up due to a crash because they only have one access to the station. And thankfully, I've got a couple dedicated people that about 3 o'clock every day drive to the station because they're, in the event there's a crash, especially during the summertime, they want to make sure they can get there. And we've spoken extensively about first responder access to the station. Probably a little different for DOT to be dealing with a volunteer department as opposed to a full-time department we have elsewhere in the state, and having to worry about responder access to a station at a high intersection. So those are my main 2 things. You already know about my concern with the slope of the road and how you're going to make that work. And I would also say that if you look at the crashes that have occurred at the intersection, they're equal southbound and northbound traffic. So having the dedicated right turn lane both directions will be vital if you look at the data available to you.
Okay, good comments, thank you. Yeah, well, I mean, we'll certainly look into more for that permanent signal specifically. You know, we can look into what options might be able to be done, that right-hand turn. I can't promise anything, I haven't looked at it, but I mean, it's good feedback to have. We'll certainly take it back and talk about it some more. I don't know, Bob, if you want to speak to any of that or not. But.
No, what we've shown right now for the permanent signal and the lane configuration, that's all just a conceptual based on, you know, rough information. As we move forward, as the town's desire, then we'll get into the actual engineering of it. And those types of decisions, we will have more data to make those types of judgments.
I have a question about the, if you're going southbound on Route 1, you're coming into the bridge, and there's that S-turn there. Is that going to stay? Because it seems to be you're coming down and you're turning, but I can see slipping there. So is that going to stay throughout the winter? And 2, what do you need to make that light a Nequasset permanent? Like, what are the steps do you need town permission? Do you need can you do that before you widen those roads? Can you at least make that light a permanent light, which would offer you more access to changes?
So the second part of that, there is not a plan to remove the signal before a permanent signal is put in place. So we acknowledge that that is the preferred option for everybody, is to have a signal there. Again, we want to have a smooth transition to a permanent signal. So, you know, order of operations of how things go through there, that would have to be vetted out and worked out as far as, is it added to the bridge work? Is it a standalone project? Those things would have to be sorted out before I can, I guess, accurately answer that question. We certainly understand the concerns, the desire to have it permanently, and whatnot. So TBD, but there's no plans to have it go back to just stop signs on Nequasset Road, and that's what we'll work to help coordinate.
So what is the difference between a temporary light and a permanent light when you already got a light up there?
Again, so...
It's like you're stepping on your own foot.
No, if I wasn't clear enough before, I will try to be better this time. So the temporary signals were only intended to be there for a few years. So they weren't put up on mast arms, they weren't put up on you know, a strung cable that's intended to be there permanently long term. The detection system that's utilized on a temporary signal may be the same depending on the area of the state, but in this case, you know, it might suit us more to have more of a fixed system. Right now, it's a camera that points towards the Nequasset Road. When it sees a vehicle come up, it starts the process after a certain amount of time, or when it sees the vehicle, whatever it is. A permanent signal, you can have things that are in the ground. You have the pressure plate that lets you know when something's there. It's a more permanent basis of the equipment, so that it's not as easily, you know, blown out of alignment, so that the camera's not pointing at the Nequasset Road anymore. Right? Those things. So it's it's a more fixed system that requires less maintenance. So it's, you know, we don't go out to every intersection in Augusta to repoint a camera when there's a windstorm. You know, there's certain things that, you know, we put out, here's our minimums that we need for this intersection. It needs to be able to be preempted so the fire department can get through. You know, it needs to work and have, you know, this many heads and run all night and blah, 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 blah. And this is what the contractor installed, right? So we have more say over a permanent structure and what goes in there.
Can I ask my question, right? The second part of my question, just the estimate of you're coming down the hill, is that going to be there permanently in the winter?
So the alignment of the roadway is what it's going to be during construction. You know, if there are concerns, we're certainly happy to listen to them and do what we can to potentially address them. But that is an alignment that meets minimum construction curvature for safe passage for the speed of the roadway through there. So it feels different. I understand that. It's the first winter. There may be some issues. You know, it's laid out to the point where it can be traversed and navigated without extra effort. You know, compared, you know, it's not intended to be a racetrack that you have to weave and things through, but to fit everything in a really tight area, you know, construction tolerances are a little tighter. I guess that's probably why it feels a little different than a typical curve would.
Just real quick, you said you had a copy of this you were going to provide to the town. I was just hoping we could see that on the website or something.
Yeah, I'll give this presentation to the town.
Actually, this is a timing question that I'm not sure, maybe Reed's purview to ask, but given the concerns about the noise on the big concrete planks on the large part of the detour, is there a plan to since you're going to be preloading that one section for a year, is there a plan maybe to build the new bridge, Station 46 bridge, and reconnect and get rid of that long concrete planking before it's all finished? Does that make sense?
Theoretically, they could. I mean, it really is up to their construction phasing. But yeah, I mean, theoretically, they'll have a full year of working on Station 46 before they can even start on the Pleasant Cove Bridge, which is the name of this one. So, theoretically. Okay. But again, means and methods, we try not to specify unless it's hugely important from a safety perspective. I understand the sound is obnoxious, but it's really up to them and how they go. But yeah, I mean, they're going to have to demo all of that temporary stuff at some point too. So depending on how it works out, they could.
We appreciate your comment.
I would like to say, I thought that the DOT did a great job of signage and warning people that there were changes and all of that. That was very helpful, and I'm sure that has helped to have fewer accidents because there is a lot of warning that there's something different. And but I hear a lot of support for having the speed limit looked at. I wondered if that's something you could take back to look at, maybe keeping a consistent lower speed approaching the lights, if that would be helpful, and of course construction as well. But in both directions, that we slow things down a little so that I hear a lot of concern about pulling up to, and I make the right turn there every time I go out too. To turn into Nequasset, and it is. It's I haven't had any problems with it, but I'm hearing a lot of concern, especially in winter, ice up the road, whatever, that might be wise to be going more slowly.
Yeah, and we'll take it back to our traffic folks and ask them to take a look at it. I think at this point we've gotten quite a bit of feedback about it here, so it's a question that we'll ask. That's out of Bob and I's control, unfortunately, but we'll bring it up to the folks that do review that.
This has nothing to do with this project. When you come down 127, like coming around, you got a dedicated lane to merge in. Why did they never do that for a route?
Good question. I'm not sure, you know,
Because I had a guy come up here 2 years ago, come straight across the Cumberland Farms, and I had to hit the ice box on the side of the building in order to avoid it. And I took the front fender off with a brand new Tesla.
You know, some of it is, you know, these roadways are older. I don't know the age of the design or the construction of it. Some of it is just that it's older. It's not the same standards. It's not the same.